Now close your eyes and imagine yourself in the turbulent waters of the 13th century, with the wind whistling on the deck and waves pounding your ship. The air is cold, the food is not fresh, and there's always another ship on the horizon that could appear and become your nightmare. This could be an ordinary day for a pirate. But was this life for you? Living as a pirate in the Middle Ages appealed not only to adventurous spirits, but also to those with a very strong survival instinct. Welcome to the History and Sleep channel, dear listener. Today, we will journey together to the Middle Ages and try to live as pirates. Let's see what difficulties await us. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and write in the comments where you're listening from. Reading your comments really motivates me. Let's begin. Where the depths of the sea meet the horizon, the waters have always had their own laws. While kings and empires on land were busy with power struggles, another force ruled the seas. Pirates, especially the Middle Ages, could be called the golden age of these sea bandits. But how did these outlaws manage to dominate the seas so thoroughly? Piracy, one of the oldest professions in history, has appeared wherever seafaring began. However, the Middle Ages, with its combination of economic, political, and social conditions, prepared an unprecedented ground for piracy. Starting with the fall of the Western Roman Empire, this period offered a perfect environment of chaos with the weakening of central authorities and the emergence of scattered kingdoms and principalities. The situation at sea was different. The lack of strong navies, the increase in trade, and the allure of plunder drove many to join under the pirate flag. Trade in the Middle Ages, especially sea trade, was a very risky business. While city-states like Venice and Genoa were pioneers in trade in the Mediterranean, the Hanseatic League was stirring up storms in the North Sea and Baltic. These merchant ships were laden with valuable cargo: silk, spices, gold, silver. It was precisely at this point that the hungry wolves of the sea came into play. It was like a cocktail that combined the promise of wealth, desperation, and an adventurous spirit. So who were these people who embarked on this dangerous life? Often those who had little to lose on land: farmers, fishermen, or criminals. But sometimes, adventurous nobles, even states themselves, got involved in this business. Yes, you read that right. In the Middle Ages, some kings and princes gave pirates official permits called letters of marque to disrupt their enemies' trade. With these letters, pirates could legally attack enemy ships, give a portion of the captured loot to the state, and keep the rest in their pockets. This practice was called privateering, and it instantly turned piracy into a legitimate line of work. Geographical location also played an important role in the rise of piracy. Islands in the Mediterranean, such as Rhodes, Crete, the labyrinthine coasts of the Aegean Sea, the fjords of the North Sea, and the islets of the Baltic provided perfect hiding and base areas for pirates. They would hide in these places, ambush merchant ships, hide their plunder, and set sail for new adventures. Medieval piracy was not monolithic. The Vikings were the nightmare of the North and could be considered the ancestors of piracy. They plundered European coasts with their ships, burning and destroying settlements. Later, Barbary pirates emerged in the Mediterranean. They set out from the North African coasts, attacked European ships, and enslaved their crews. There were also inland sea pirates who attacked their own citizens, and they were a major headache for the state. The feudal structure of the Middle Ages also provided a breeding ground for piracy. While local lords sometimes couldn't even fully establish authority in their own lands, doing so at sea was much more difficult. Ships were generally not well protected, which meant easy prey for pirates. In short, The Middle Ages was a period in the lawless world of the seas where adventure, danger, and wealth roamed freely. Pirates were not just ship-plundering bandits. They were also actors who found their place within the political and economic balances of the age, sometimes even used by states. In a sense, they were the free entrepreneurs of the seas of that era. Lawless but clever, ruthless but courageous, that a ship appears in the middle of the sea. It glides like a shadow on the horizon and suddenly becomes the merchant ship's nightmare. The flag on it is familiar. The pirate flag. But this wasn't like the fantasy-filled battles you see in movies. Medieval pirates used ruthless, clever, and practical tactics to survive and obtain loot. So what exactly did these feared warriors of the seas do? And what was in their arsenal? The biggest advantage of medieval pirates was usually stealth and speed. They weren't bulky and slow like large warships. On the contrary, they preferred small, agile, and fast ships. This gave them a great advantage, especially in windy weather or narrow straits. Ambush. Pirates knew trade routes and harbor entrances or exits very well. They would lie in wait along frequently used routes, waiting for defenseless merchant ships. Sometimes they would hide behind islands or the coastline and emerge with a sudden attack when their prey appeared. Observation and intelligence. Many pirates collaborated with local fishermen or port workers to learn when and which route valuable ships would pass. This intelligence was vital for a successful raid. Night raids and fog advantage. Darkness and fog were the pirates' best friends. Sudden raids at night or attacks in foggy weather would surprise and catch the enemy ship's crew unprepared. Low visibility allowed pirate ships to approach unnoticed. Psychological warfare. Pirates aimed to win not only through physical strength but also by instilling fear. The sudden appearance of a pirate flag, like early versions of the Jolly Roger or flags bearing different symbols, would demoralize many merchant ship crews. Sometimes it even made them surrender without resistance. The pirates' savage reputation already did half the job: numerical superiority and surprise attack. When attacking a merchant ship, pirates usually tried to be numerically superior. They would surround the target with their fast ships, then launch a sudden and shocking attack by boarding with grappling hooks. The aim was to quickly incapacitate the enemy and break their resistance. The weapons used by medieval pirates were shaped by the technology of the period and practical needs. Unlike large navies, pirates usually gravitated towards practical, versatile, and easily portable weapons. Swords and axes. For close combat on deck, swords, especially short, one-handed swords, sometimes curved, and axes were indispensable. Axes were useful for both injuring the enemy and cutting the ship's ropes or masts. Daggers and knives. Every pirate had a dagger or knife on their belt or in their boot. These were both last resort weapons and tools for daily tasks. Bows, arrows, and crossbows. For attacking from a distance, bows and arrows and crossbows, arbalètes, were used. Crossbows were especially effective even for untrained pirates and had armor-piercing potential. However, damp sea air could affect bows, limiting their use. Grappling hooks. The most effective way to board another ship was grappling hooks. These hooks attached to ropes were thrown onto the enemy's ship, hooked on, and allowed pirates to quickly climb aboard. This was an integral part of pirate tactics. Early forms of guns. Arquebus. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, especially around the 14th century, primitive guns like the arquebus began to appear. Although not very reliable or accurate yet, they could create a shock effect on the enemy with their noise and smoke. However, their widespread use came more in the early modern period. Ships' weapons, catapults or early cannons could be found on large pirate ships or in fortresses. These could be used to immobilize an enemy ship or force surrender. However, pirates usually preferred close combat to avoid damaging the loot. Small swivel guns located on the ship's bow were also useful for more mobile targets. Medieval pirates were, in a sense, guerrilla warriors of the sea. Against the massive ships and powerful cannons of official navies, they survived using factors like intelligence, speed, surprise, and ruthlessness. Their existence deeply affected maritime history and forever changed trade routes. Pirates chasing prey on the seas, their ships laden with plunder, eventually had to anchor somewhere. It was at this point that pirate strongholds came into play. These strongholds were not just shelters. They were also operational centers, loot depots, and a kind of pirate business office. So what kind of life did these lords of the sea lead on land? Let's lift the curtains on the pirates' secret bases. For a pirate, a safe harbor was sometimes more valuable than an entire empire's navy. These harbors not only offered protection from storms but also provided strategic points where they could sell captured goods, repair their ships, and procure supplies and crew. In the Middle Ages, pirates generally preferred geographically isolated, hard-to-reach, and easily defensible places. Uncharted islands, small, off-the-map islands, remote and undiscovered islands where pirates could hide from enemies, were favorites. These islands often had labyrinthine caves and hidden coves. Narrow, shallow bays that were too shallow for large warships to enter but deep enough for pirate ships were ideal hiding spots. Labyrinthine rocky formations along the coast, these areas served as natural defense lines. It was easy to hide and set ambushes within them. These harbors were both home and workplace for a pirate. Loot was stored here, the crew rested, new plans were made, and of course, captured goods were sold on the black market. Usually, these harbors had some kind of relationship, sometimes forced, sometimes through bribery, with the local populace who provided the pirates with food, water, and other basic needs. While some pirates only used mobile bases, larger, more organized pirate groups would build fortresses or fortified settlements. These fortresses were usually built on a natural hill, surrounded by thick stone walls, and equipped with watchtowers. The aim was to protect against threats from both the sea and potential land attacks. Life in a pirate fortress could be said to be much more comfortable than at sea, but it was still in a state of complete disorder. Warehouses and storerooms, loot, weapons, supplies, and materials for repairs were stored here. Workshops. There were workshops for ship repair, sail making, and weapon maintenance. Living quarters. Simple houses or barracks where pirates could rest and sleep. Entertainment and social areas. These were essential. After all, men living such a dangerous life needed to relieve stress. These fortresses also functioned like training camps. New recruits were trained here in fighting techniques, ship management, and survival skills. One of the essential features of a pirate fortress was secret passages and escape routes. In case enemies might capture the fortress, pirates usually built tunnels, secret doors, or cave systems connected to the sea. Through these passages, they could procure supplies even under siege or escape as a last resort. These secret passages were also used to confuse enemy ships. Pirate ships could suddenly appear from a narrow passage to launch surprise attacks on enemies or lose pursuers in these labyrinths. In short, a pirate fortress in the Middle Ages was not just a structure, it was also a strategic brain center. This was both the pirates' operational base and their home. While adapting to the savage rules of the sea, they had also managed to establish their own order on land. These fortresses were proof that they were not just bandits, but also organized and clever individuals. In the depths of the seas, there were the so-called kings of the outlaws. They had not established their kingdoms on lands where kings fought for thrones, but upon the waves, writing their names in history with blood and salt. In the Middle Ages, there were such pirate captains who defied massive navies, amassed loot upon loot, and became the subject of legends, that their stories still circulate by word of mouth even today. Let's take a closer look at these formidable heroes of the seas. At the dawn of the Middle Ages, from the end of the 8th century onwards, the first great sea bandits who swept across Europe were undoubtedly the Vikings. They were not only pirates but also explorers, traders, and settlers. However, their raids on the coasts of the west were pure piracy. Ragnar Lothbrok, Although a legendary figure, Ragnar's stories show how daring Viking Age piracy was. Known for epic acts like the sack of Paris, Ragnar was not only a chieftain but also a strategy expert. Their crossing of rivers with longboats to infiltrate inland regions was one of the Vikings' most feared tactics. Chieftains like him were after not only loot but also warrior glory. Rollo, another famous Viking chieftain, Rollo, was one of those who besieged Paris and was eventually granted the title of Duke of Normandy by the French king. This is an interesting example of how Viking pirates could transform into settled powers over time. The Vikings were known not only for their hit-and-run tactics but also for their superior seamanship and warrior spirit. Their ships were very fast and agile for the time, making them difficult targets to pursue. As the Middle Ages progressed, the Mediterranean turned into an arena of constant conflict between Christian and Muslim states. This environment was ideal for piracy to flourish. Heredin Barbarossa, 15th to 16th centuries. Although technically falling in the transition period from the late Middle Ages to the early modern era, Heredin Barbarossa, one of the most famous Ottoman admirals and essentially a privateer, was a name that instilled fear in the Mediterranean. Together with his brother Orik Rees, he established a powerful fleet along the North African coast. With his ships, seamanship, and strategic intelligence, he challenged Spanish and Venetian fleets. His aim was not only plunder but also to increase the Ottoman Empire's dominance at sea. His story is the best example of how state-sponsored piracy could be effective. Pietro Gradenigo, 14th century, a lesser-known but important figure for Venice, Pietro was actually a Venetian doge. However, he did not hesitate to use his own pirate fleets to protect Venice's trade and harm its rivals. This shows how statesmen used piracy as a tool. English and French pirates in the shadow of the Hundred Years' War. During the Hundred Years' War, 1337 to 1453, the English and French coasts were also places where pirates roamed. Both sides resorted to privateers to attack each other's merchant ships. Eustace the monk, 13th century, originally a monk, Eustace became a sea bandit during the Anglo-French Wars. He worked for both the English and French kings, but his loyalty was unclear. He was known for his strategic genius and cunning. He terrorized the English Channel with his ships, captured many merchant ships, and became a legendary figure. Although his end was not good, he was one of the most colorful pirates of the Middle Ages. These pirate captains stood out not only for their lawlessness but also for their courage, seamanship, and leadership qualities. They were a reflection of the chaotic structure of the period. In an age of weak central authority where the seas were a free market, they were men who set their own rules and charted their own destinies. Their stories, carried to the present day by the salty winds of the sea, remind us how savage yet fascinating the Middle Ages were. The Middle Ages was not only an era of knights, castles, and kingdoms. It was also the golden age of seas, ships, and trade. So how did this increased maritime activity affect pirates in a period when trade accelerated? Or more accurately, did trade routes become like an open buffet for pirates? Let's take a closer look at this complex relationship. In the Middle Ages, overland trade was both very dangerous and slow. There were no bridges, roads were poorly maintained, and robbers roamed everywhere. Naturally, sea trade became much more logical. Especially in the Mediterranean, city-states like Venice, Genoa, and Pisa, and in the North Sea and Baltic, the Hanseatic League, had established a vast trade network. These ships were filled with priceless goods from the east, silk, spices, jewelry. From the west, products like wool, grain, and metal set sailed towards the east. Each was like a floating treasure chest. For pirates, this situation was like a giant gift package sitting in the middle of the sea with, "Come plunder me," written on it. The intensification of trade meant more targets and more loot for pirates. Therefore, the more trade increased, the more attractive piracy became. Because even if the risk of capture increased, the potential gain was much higher. A few successful raids could sustain a pirate crew for months, even years. Sea trade routes were essentially the pirates' hunting grounds. Pirates usually settled in the busiest trade routes and narrow straits. If a ship's route from one port to another was predictable, setting an ambush was child's play for pirates. The Mediterranean, the intense trade between Italian city-states and the eastern Mediterranean, especially along the Aegean Islands and North African coasts, exploded pirate activity. The Knights of Rhodes' struggle against piracy was not in vain. The English Channel, trade links between England and France made this region attractive for French and English pirates. The Baltic Sea, the Hanseatic League's merchant ships were the target of pirate groups like the Victual Brothers. For pirates, these trade routes were like loot zones marked with a red pencil on the map. Merchant ships were slow, generally poorly equipped, and crewed by merchants not eager to fight, making them easy prey for pirates. The effect of piracy on trade: prices rise, confidence declines. Piracy deeply affected not only individual merchants, but the entire trade system. Cost increase. Due to pirate attacks, merchant ships had to be better protected, more guards, better armament, or resorting to insurance-like practices. All these additional costs were reflected in the price of goods, reaching the end consumer more expensively. Route changes. To avoid areas with intense pirate activity, merchants had to use longer, more dangerous, or more costly routes. This led to slower and less efficient trade. Loss of confidence and decrease in trade volume. The constant risk of attack caused some merchants to give up trade or reduce its volume. This negatively affected overall economic activity. State intervention. Piracy became such a big problem that states were forced to strengthen their navies, fight pirates, or, as mentioned before, issue privateering letters. Sometimes even using pirates to their advantage shows how great piracy's impact on trade was. In short, in the Middle Ages, sea trade and piracy were like two intertwined destinies. While the increase in trade fueled piracy, piracy directly affected the flow, cost, and reliability of trade. This was a real chicken and egg dilemma. Did trade give birth to piracy, or did piracy change the shape of trade? Perhaps both. After all, the sea was never calm. One of the largest mass movements of the Middle Ages, the Crusades, caused incredible activity not only on land but also at sea. Thousands of knights, soldiers, pilgrims, and merchants flocked from Europe to the Holy Land, turning sea routes into a veritable highway. So where did pirates stand in this sacred journey? Let's examine together how this religious zeal opened a source of income for the outlaws of the sea. The Crusades meant people from all over Europe setting sail for the Mediterranean in massive ships. These ships carried not only soldiers and knights but also their valuable belongings, supplies, weapons, and even war booty. Imagine a ship full of armor, precious stones, and perhaps loot obtained from a siege of a castle. Could there be a better target for pirates? The routes to the Holy Land, especially in the Mediterranean, became a complete buffet for pirates. Crusaders' ships were generally heavy and slow, carrying much more valuable cargo than merchant ships, and were not always well protected. Moreover, the Crusaders' routes were often predictable, providing perfect ground for pirates to set ambushes. The sea logistics of the Crusades were largely provided by Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa. These cities amassed enormous wealth by renting ships and transporting soldiers and supplies. However, this situation also created new opportunities for piracy. Rival cities' pirates. While Venice's ships were on the sacred journey, Genoese pirates, or vice versa, could turn this situation to their advantage. Pirates could be used to harm the trade of rival cities even without a formal declaration of war. After all, although the Crusades served a religious purpose, economic and political interests were always involved. Sacred piracy. In some cases, knights or soldiers participating in the Crusades themselves could turn to piracy. Shortages of supplies, greed for money, or simply opportunism could drive them to attack other ships on the way. Their own ships being unprotected also made them easy targets. Another important figure of the Crusades was military orders like the Knights of Rhodes. With their bases near the Holy Land, these knights were responsible for protecting Christian pilgrims and trade, but they also carried out activities called holy piracy against Muslim ships. The Muslim ships and cargo they captured played a significant role in financing the order. So they acted as both pirate hunters and somewhat like pirates themselves. This situation shows how many gray areas existed in the Middle Ages. The increased piracy during the Crusades also left lasting effects on seamanship and maritime law. Advances in shipbuilding. The need for better protection led to the construction of larger, stronger, and more armed ships. Convoy system. To protect themselves from pirate attacks, merchants and crusaders began traveling in convoys, grouping ships together. This helped distribute the risk. Development of maritime law. Piracy led to the further development of maritime law. New rules and agreements began to be made to combat piracy. In short, the seas of the Middle Ages not only served as a vehicle for a sacred journey but also created an unprecedented opportunity for piracy. Ships that set out for holy purposes had to face the harsh realities of the sea. This situation shows us once again that every major movement in history has a shadow side, and the main actors of this shadow side are usually the outlaws of the sea. The seas of the Middle Ages did not harbor a single type of pirate figure. From the icy waters of the north to the scorching sun of the Mediterranean, there were sea bandits from different geographies, cultures, and armed with different purposes. Some came for plunder, some for the slave trade, and some as the secret weapon of their state. Let's discover this mosaic of lawless sailors that adorned the seas of the Middle Ages. At the dawn of the Middle Ages, from the end of the 8th century onwards, the long ships emerging from the fjords of northern Europe terrorized coastal Europe. These were the so-called Vikings. They were not only pirates but also brave explorers, reaching America long before Columbus, traders, and settlers. However, in the eyes of Europeans, they were often ruthless sea bandits. Characteristics and objectives. Their long ships, drakers, could enter shallow waters, were fast, and moved by both oar and sail, giving the Vikings the ability to infiltrate coastlines and even deep into rivers. Plunder and expansion. Viking raids usually targeted monasteries, villages, and cities. The aim was to gather loot, take captives, and settle in new lands. Warrior culture. The Vikings had a culture that took pride in courage and warrior glory. Plunder was both their livelihood and a means of gaining social status. Their raids reaching England, Ireland, France, and even the Mediterranean show how wide an area they spread. Although the Vikings actually represented much more than the term pirate, they have gone down in history as the first great and organized plunderers of the Middle Ages at sea. A ship appears on the horizon in the middle of the sea. But this ship is different from the others. That ominous symbol dancing with the wind on its mast is enough to freeze the blood of all sailors. The pirate flag. The Jolly Roger, the skull and crossbones symbol we are familiar with from movies and stories today, was actually just the tip of the iceberg. The pirate flags used in the Middle Ages and later were not only a declaration of identity, but also a psychological weapon, a warning, and even an expression of a life philosophy. So what were the meanings behind these flags and symbols, and where did their power come from? The pirate flag was the fastest and most effective way to declare a ship as a pirate. These symbols, usually drawn on a black or red background, gave a clear message to the merchant ship's crew long before contact with the enemy ship. Do not resist, or you will lose your lives. The real power of these flags lay in the fear and demoralization they created. While traveling at sea was dangerous enough, the appearance of a pirate flag on the horizon would break the resistance of most captains and crew before it even began. The aim was to capture the ship without shedding blood because every conflict also meant risk for the pirates. The language of colors, black and red. There were two colors most frequently used on pirate flags, each with a deep meaning. Black flag usually meant death or that no mercy would be shown. Hoisting the black flag was a warning that if they did not surrender, the entire crew would be put to the sword or the ship would be sunk. This was the clearest version of the "surrender or die" message. Red flag carried an even more ruthless meaning. When the red flag was raised, it generally meant that the enemy would be completely destroyed or the ship burned. This was often a threat known as "no quarter." Sometimes pirates would first approach under a false friendly flag, a national flag, and then suddenly reveal their true pirate flag when they got close enough to their prey. This surprise effect was to catch the enemy completely unprepared. The evolution and meanings of symbols. Throughout the Middle Ages, the symbols on pirate flags could vary from region to region and from captain to captain. Although the widespread use of the Jolly Roger coincides more with the 17th and 18th centuries, similar themes were used in the Middle Ages. Skull and crossbones, Jolly Roger. This symbol was the most direct representative of death and the fragility of life. It reminded those who did not surrender that their fate would resemble it. Hourglass, often supported by additional elements like an hourglass or crossed swords. The hourglass symbol signaled that time was running out for the enemy, and they had to make a very quick decision. Surrender or die. Heart symbol, very rare, but there were also flags bearing symbols like a bleeding heart. This usually carried the meaning that the enemy's courage or life would soon end. Viking dragon heads. The carved dragon heads on the prows of Viking longships were actually fear-inducing symbols. These ominous figures rising from the sea aimed to establish psychological superiority over the enemy. This was perhaps one of the earliest ancestors of the pirate flag. Local symbols. Groups like the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean or the Vittel brothers in the Baltic may have used their own cultural or religious symbols on their flags. This showed their identity and belonging. The power of the flag, from identity to adventure. The pirate flag was not only a tool of threat but also a symbol of identity and unity. For the crews serving on a pirate ship, this flag represented their shared adventure, lawless lifestyle, and loyalty to each other. Gathering under the flag also showed loyalty to a specific pirate captain or group. In a sense, these flags also carried the message, "We are free spirits who do not recognize the law." They symbolized the freedom of the sea and defied the rules and authority on land. In conclusion, pirate flags in the Middle Ages and later were not just pieces of cloth. They were powerful symbols carrying the identity of the most feared figures of the sea, initiating psychological warfare and summarizing a lifestyle. Each symbol and color whispered a story, issued a threat, and declared the power of the lawless kings of the sea. When we think of medieval piracy, bearded, noisy, and ruthless men usually come to mind. But the salty wind of the sea, the ship's deck, and the sound of swords were not exclusive to men. When the dusty pages of history are parted, it emerges that there were also brave, clever, and often more ruthless than their male counterparts, female pirates on the seas of the Middle Ages. So who were these female captains, and how did they find their place in the male-dominated seas? In the Middle Ages, a woman being on a ship's deck, especially on a pirate ship, was a taboo in itself. While social norms focused women on household chores and family, areas like seafaring and war belonged to men. However, some women challenged these norms, either following their destiny or having to strap on a sword to survive. The stories of female pirates are generally less documented than those of their male counterparts. There were several reasons for this. Secret identities. Many women joined pirate ships disguised as men. This was both to survive and to avoid the prejudices and dangers they might face as women. They would cut their hair short, wear masculine clothes, and try to deepen their voices. Small groups or singular figures. Female pirates usually operated in smaller groups or alone. This made tracking their traces difficult. Historians overlooking them. Historians of the period generally did not value female figures or did not find their adventures worthy of recording. Despite all these difficulties, the names of some female pirates have been written in golden letters in history. Legendary female pirates and their stories. Some female pirates mentioned in sources from the Middle Ages or who have become legends prove the existence of these brave spirits. Alfhild, Viking Age, Norway. Mentioned in Norse legends, Alfhild was a princess. Instead of marrying the prince she was engaged to, she boarded a pirate ship, taking her crew with her. She plundered many ships in the Baltic Sea and along the Norwegian coasts. Her story shows that women of the Viking Age were not just figures sitting at home but could also be warriors and leaders. According to legend, even when the prince chased and caught his fiancée, Alfhild's struggle was not over. He had to fight her. Jeanne de Clisson, France, 14th century. The Lioness of Brittany, one of the most well-known female pirate figures to emerge during the 100 Years' War. A noble Breton woman, Jeanne swore revenge after her husband was unjustly executed by the French king. She sold her assets, bought 3 black ships, and painted their sails black and hulls red. She allied with the English and ruthlessly attacked French merchant ships in the English Channel. Her target was only French ships, and she was infamous for beheading the French nobles she captured and throwing them into the sea. Known as the Lioness of Brittany, Jeanne was a fearless and ruthless leader burning with the fire of revenge. Her story shows how personal tragedy could transform a woman into one of the most dangerous figures of the sea. Sayyidah al-Hurra, Morocco, 16th century. Although falling in the transition period from the late Middle Ages to the early modern era, she is an important figure carrying the medieval spirit. She was the queen of Tetuan and a powerful pirate captain. After the fall of Al-Andalus, Sayyidah engaged in revenge piracy against Portuguese and Spanish ships. She allied with the Barbary pirates and held great power in the western waters of the Mediterranean. With her political intelligence and military ability, she was not only a pirate but also an effective ruler. Although medieval female pirates were limited in number, their existence added a different dimension to maritime history. They were brave spirits who challenged gender roles, carved out a place for themselves with their swords and intelligence. and fought for their freedom and revenge. Their stories show that the sea was not a place where only men ruled and that women could be just as ruthless, clever, and fearless as them. The adventure and danger-filled piracy on the seas in the Middle Ages was not always completely lawless. Sometimes kings and emperors themselves did not hesitate to use outlaws for their own interests. This is where state-sponsored piracy, or privateering, came into play. This was the ingenious way for kings to strike their enemies, fill their coffers, and have dirty work done by others without risking their own navies. In other words, a period of officially licensed banditry at sea. A letter of marque and reprisal was a legal permit given by a state or sovereign to a seafarer, their own citizen. This permit authorized that seafarer, that ship, to attack, plunder, and capture the merchant ships or coastal settlements of a specific enemy state. It sounds like piracy. Because it was. The only difference was that this time you had the law on your side. So how did this system work? Justification. A state wanting to wage economic war even without formally declaring war on another state, or aiming to weaken the enemy's commercial power. Sometimes it was used as compensation for damages the enemy state caused to its own citizens. Issuance of the letter. The sovereign usually gave this letter to an experienced seafarer or merchant. The letter specified which nation's ships the privateer could attack, what kind of goods they could seize, and how much of the loot would be given to the state, usually between 10% and 30%. Activities. The privateer or corsair, holding the letter, would set sail with this document and search for enemy ships. They would bring the captured goods to their own port, pay the state's share, and divide the rest among their crew. Legal protection. This letter distinguished the privateer from an ordinary pirate. If captured, they had the right to be treated as a prisoner of war rather than hanged as an ordinary pirate. This was a great security for them. King's dirty relationships. Why would a king use pirates? There were many reasons why kings and states established such dirty relationships with pirates. Economic attrition. Attacking the trade ships of an enemy country directly harmed their economy. This was an effective way to weaken the enemy even without declaring war. Capturing valuable goods going to or coming from enemy ports cut the other side's income. Navy cost. Building and maintaining its own navy was very expensive. Privateers, on the other hand, provided a kind of freelance sea power without burdening the state budget. The risk was the privateers, the profit was shared. This was a low-cost war strategy. Legal cover. The letter of marque was essentially putting a legal cover on an illegal activity. Thus, states could enable their citizens to harm the enemy without being in a criminal position. Famous examples: state-sponsored bandits. There are many examples of such state-sponsored privateers in the Middle Ages and later. Early models of the Vikings. Although there was no direct letter system, there were cases where Viking chieftains were used by some kings for their own interests, and later transformed into settled powers. Conflicts in the English Channel between England and France. During the 100 Years' War, both English and French kings frequently resorted to privateers to target each other's merchant ships. Names like Eustace the Monk are among the best-known examples of these gray-area pirates who served one king while also working for their own interests. Knights of Rhodes, operating in the Mediterranean during the Crusades against Muslim ships in the name of holy war, these knights were, in a sense, the state-sponsored pirates of the Christian world. Barbary pirates and the Ottoman Empire, especially in the late Middle Ages and early modern era. The Ottoman Empire used the Barbary pirates in North Africa against Christian trade in the Mediterranean. Figures like Hayreddin Barbarossa are the brightest examples of this dirty relationship, being both pirate captains and admirals of the Ottoman Navy. State-sponsored piracy was a product of the complex political and economic structure of the Middle Ages. Kings used these lawless kings of the seas as pawns in their own grand games without dirtying their own hands. This shows us once again that when power and profit are at stake, borders and legal concepts can be quite flexible. They were the ruthless masters of the seas. They were free spirits who recognized no law. But every adventure has an end, and the fate awaiting a captured pirate was often horrifying and exemplary. In the Middle Ages and beyond, piracy was a crime that paralyzed sea trade and was the nightmare of kings and merchants. Therefore, the punishments given to captured pirates reflected the severity of the crime with a corresponding cruelty. Let's take a look at the savage fates these outlaws of the sea faced when they set foot on solid ground. Why were pirates' punishments so severe? There were several important reasons for this. Economic damage. Pirates caused great damage to the economy by plundering massive merchant ships. This negatively affected not only merchants but also the tax revenues and general prosperity of kingdoms. Defying state authority. By establishing their own laws at sea, pirates directly challenged the sovereignty and authority of states. Punishing them was a way to reinforce state power and control. Deterrence. The harsh punishments given to pirates aimed to deter potential pirates from this path. When people saw what awaited them at the end of a pirate's life, they would think twice. Instilling fear. The exemplary punishment of captured pirates showed both sailors and the common people how dangerous and unforgivable the crime of piracy was. Trial as spectacle, not justice. The trial process for a captured pirate was usually short and to the point. The luxury of expecting a fair trial was often absent. Evidence was generally secondary. What mattered was whether the person was a pirate. Piracy was often seen as equivalent to treason, which brought severe punishments. Pirates were usually tried in public squares, on docks, or in marketplaces. This was also a kind of spectacle. The message was given before the public eye that disruption of order would not go unpunished. The ruthless ends awaiting pirates. Hanging. As an example, to be hanged, the most well-known and widespread punishment for piracy was hanging. But this was not an ordinary hanging. Pirates were usually hanged on gallows at harbor entrances or places easily visible from the sea. One of the most horrific practices was hanging in chains or gibbeting. The pirate's corpse would be left chained at the hanging site for weeks, even months, left to rot and swing in the wind. This was an open warning to other sailors and pirates. It meant, "Look, this will be your end." Corpses torn apart by birds were a chilling sight for everyone traveling the sea. Being thrown overboard or put to the sword. In some cases, pirates were thrown overboard or executed on the ship without trial. This was very common for those captured during combat. Torture. Before hanging, pirates could be subjected to torture to force confessions or learn the locations of other pirates. Galley slavery. Kuruk Sazasi. Some pirates were sentenced to row on galleys for life or for a set period instead of execution. This was a slow death. Rowing on galleys meant a life chained in heavy chains, in filth, struggling with hunger and beatings. Many died quickly from disease or exhaustion. Selling the crew. The crews of captured ships, if proven not directly involved in piracy, were usually sold as slaves or put to work as prisoners on other ships. The privateer difference. As mentioned above, those possessing a privateering letter were not executed like ordinary pirates if captured. They were considered prisoners of war and were usually ransomed or exchanged. This shows what a great advantage having a letter was. The end for pirates was usually as ruthless as the storms of the sea. While chasing freedom and plunder, they also carried the constant risk of being captured and hanged as an example on history's warning plaque. Piracy in this era was not just a crime. It was also a rebellion against the social order, and the price of this rebellion could literally be deadly. Hidden in the depths of the sea, on windy islands, and in the folds of old maps, there is a legend: pirate treasure. In the stories we've heard since childhood, adventurers chasing maps marked with an X constantly search for chests filled with gold and jewels. But did medieval pirates really have such legendary treasures? Or was this just a romantic fantasy carried on the salty sea breeze? Let's lift this mysterious veil. When we think of pirate treasure, vast chests filled with gold coins, silver ingots, diamonds, rubies, and pearls immediately come to mind. This image triggers not only our imagination but also the mystery of the past and the quest for wealth. The popularity of these legends, combined with the adventurous and lawless nature of pirates, creates an irresistible allure. However, the reality is often more complex than the legends. Did medieval pirates constantly draw treasure maps and bury chests in desolate corners of islands, as we see in movies? Not really. Loot management, spending, not burying. The main goal of medieval pirates was to convert the loot they captured into money and spend it as quickly as possible. A pirate ship could not store captured goods for long. They needed money for fresh supplies, ship repairs, and of course, drink, gambling, and entertainment. Captured loot generally included precious metals, gold and silver coins, ingots, or crafted items. These were the easiest to transport and convert into cash. Spices and silk. Expensive spices and silks from the East were products in high demand and fetched good prices on the black market. Weapons and supplies. Practical items like ship materials, weapons, and food/drink were also valuable to pirates. Personal belongings, jewelry, clothing, and personal items of wealthy passengers were also plundered. These goods were usually sold in the pirates' safe harbors or secret bases to merchants, smugglers, or corrupt officials. Like the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean selling goods taken from captured crusader ships in North African markets. So why did they spend immediately instead of burying? Need for liquidity. Pirates had a constant need for cash flow. Ship expenses, crew wages, and personal spending never stopped. Security concerns. Buried treasure was a constant risk. Others could find it. Even the pirates who buried it could forget its location. The safest place was where the money changed hands. Risk of disease and death. Piracy was an extremely dangerous profession. You could die on the next hunt. In such circumstances, it was more logical to spend the money you got on living immediately rather than saving it for the future. Where did the buried treasure legends come from? If pirates didn't bury treasure, where did these legends come from? Partial truths. Very rarely, some pirates might have temporarily buried a portion of their loot when they obtained a large haul or faced sudden danger. But this was usually short-term and in small amounts. Fairy tales and novels. The greatest influence came from adventure novels written in the 17th century and later. Works like Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island immortalized the buried treasure legend. Because these stories were filled with romantic and exciting elements, they were more memorable than the facts. Treasure hunters' dreams. The legend of buried treasure has been a dream chased by treasure hunters and adventurers for centuries. Every old coin or jewel found further fueled these legends. Where was the real treasure in the Middle Ages? For medieval pirates, the real treasure was in the ships they captured. capturing a merchant ship was a treasure in itself. The ship could be sold, the supplies inside used, its weapons and sails added to their own ships or sold. Even the captured crew was valuable for ransom or as slaves. This shows us that the real treasure of medieval pirates was liquid assets, cash, quickly sellable valuables, and the ship itself. Instead of burying large chests of gold on deserted islands, they preferred to put them on the market and use them immediately. This shows their practical and survival-focused nature. Although legendary treasures sound more appealing, the buried secrets of medieval pirates were actually hidden in their survival strategies, ruthless practicality, and live-for-the-moment spirits. Perhaps the real treasure was in the excitement of the next hunt and the endless freedom of the sea. From the outside, a pirate ship represented chaos, lawlessness, and complete anarchy. But the truth, born from the salt water of the sea, was much different. A pirate ship actually had quite strict rules, agreements, and even laws within itself. These weren't like royal decrees or imperial laws. It was the justice system on the ship, operating with crew contracts. Even pirates had an order. Let's take a look at the laws of these lawless ones. Joining a pirate ship didn't just mean strapping on a sword and setting sail. Every crew member had to accept the ship's and crew's written or verbal contract. These contracts were a kind of constitution for the pirates. In the Middle Ages and beyond, these contracts formed the basis of life on board. Usually, when a crew was formed, this set of rules was put in writing and posted in a place accessible to everyone. These contracts' main articles included loot sharing. This was the most important article. How captured loot would be shared was determined with specific ratios among the captain, quartermaster, crew members, the wounded, and the families of the deceased. This was the most basic point of justice and prevented conflicts. Authority and discipline. Who would have the final say on the ship? Usually the captain, and the penalties for disobeying orders or mutiny were clarified. Daily duties. Everyone's duty and responsibility on the ship, like raising sails, cleaning, standing watch, were specified. Penalties for laziness or neglect of duty could also be in the contract. Rules for gambling, alcohol, and fighting, limits on alcohol consumption, gambling stakes, and prohibitions or penalties for fighting on the ship were set. Maintaining order on the ship was essential. Women and gambling. Some contracts could have special articles like not allowing women on board or banning certain gambling games. Injury and compensation. It was specified how a pirate injured in battle or during duty would receive compensation or be entitled to a special share. This was a kind of social security among the crew. These contracts showed that pirates were not completely anarchic. They had a certain order among themselves. As long as everyone obeyed these rules, they were part of the democracy and justice on the ship. Justice on board. Who judges, who punishes? The justice system on a pirate ship was quite pragmatic. It was very different from land-based courts. It was fast, harsh, and directly goal-oriented. Crew assembly or council. On most pirate ships, important decisions and trials were made with the votes of the entire crew, including the captain and other officers. This made pirate ships more democratic than some kingdoms' autocratic governments. Even the captain had to obey the majority decision of the crew. In case of mutiny, the captain could be replaced. Captain and officers. The captain was the undisputed leader in daily operations and combat. However, regarding discipline and punishments, crew approval was usually sought, or at least the decision was announced to the crew. Officers like the quartermaster played an important role in loot sharing and internal crew discipline. Punishments. The punishments awaiting those who disobeyed the crew contract varied according to the crime and the contract. Flogging, a common punishment for minor crimes or laziness. Deduction from loot share, the mildest but effective form of punishment. Marooning, one of the most feared punishments. The guilty pirate was abandoned on a deserted island with a weapon, some water, and sometimes a single bullet. Often, this was a slow death. This punishment was used especially for serious crimes like mutiny or theft. Being put to the sword, execution the ultimate penalty for the heaviest crimes. Such decisions were usually made with the approval of the entire crew. The aims of pirate law. The basic aim of pirate law was to provide order and unity on a ship. This was critical for their survival. To survive and succeed on the open seas without support from land, the crew had to trust each other and follow certain rules. These rules were like a life preserver. Medieval and later pirate ships, however chaotic they appeared from the outside, had a quite functional and often surprisingly democratic structure within. These outlaws, who wrote their own laws and dispensed their own justice, actually present an interesting example of how a society can organize. For them, freedom at sea could only be real if certain rules were followed. While pirates, the lawless kings of the seas, threatened medieval trade and state sovereignty, staying silent about this situation was not an option. Although kingdoms sometimes used pirates to their advantage, generally pirates were the sworn enemies of states. To combat them, ensure safety on sea routes, and protect trade, navies, which we could call pirate hunters, came into play. So who were these navies, and how did they fight against the bandits of the seas? As the Middle Ages progressed, centralized kingdoms began to gain strength. This strengthening was felt not only on land but also at sea. With the increase in trade, securing sea routes and preventing piracy became a vital necessity for kingdoms. A country's prosperity was directly related to sea trade, and pirates directly threatened this prosperity. However, in the Middle Ages, establishing and maintaining regular large navies was extremely expensive. Therefore, the fight against pirates was usually carried out by the initiative of various actors. Evolving royal navies, major European powers like England, France, and Spain gradually began to establish more organized and permanent navies. One of the basic tasks of these navies was to fight pirates. These ships were larger, more heavily armored, and had more powerful weapons than pirate ships. City-state fleets, especially in the Mediterranean, seafaring city-states like Venice, Genoa, and Pisa had established their own powerful fleets to protect their commercial interests. One of the basic tasks of these fleets was to protect their trade routes from pirates. For them, piracy was a problem directly threatening their own income and survival. In a sense, they acted as both pirate hunters and, when necessary, like privateers. Hanseatic League convoys. The Hanseatic League, a powerful trade union in the North Sea and Baltic, organized convoys consisting of armed ships to protect its own merchant ships. They also deployed their own military ships to directly fight pirate groups like the Vittel brothers. Tactics and difficulties of pirate hunters. Pirate hunters usually had larger and slower ships than pirates. Therefore, their tactics were different from the pirates. Patrolling. Regular patrols were conducted on trade routes and harbor entrances frequently visited by pirates. Convoy protection. They protected valuable trade fleets by escorting them, shielding them from pirate attacks. This was one of the most effective methods. Base raids. They attempted to eliminate pirates by launching large-scale raids on their known bases, or the islands where they hid. This often required major military operations. Intelligence, spies and informants were used to track and capture pirates' movements. Bribes were given to people in ports who collaborated with pirates or could get information from them. However, the job of pirate hunters was not easy at all. Speed and agility of pirates. Pirate ships were generally smaller and faster. This made it difficult for large warships to catch them. Secret bases. Pirates using hidden coves and islands not even on maps as bases made finding and destroying them difficult. Political interference. Sometimes complex relations between states could lead to one state's own pirate hunters being used against another state's own privateers. This made the struggle even more complex. Loot was motivating. For pirates, loot was a motivation source worth risking their lives for. Breaking this motivation was difficult. The legacy of pirate hunters. The pirate hunters of the Middle Ages laid the foundations of modern naval forces. Their struggle with pirates played an important role in the development of naval strategies, ship designs, and maritime law. The cruel punishments given to captured pirates were also an indicator of how seriously this pirate hunt was taken. This relentless struggle between the bandits of the sea and those trying to maintain order and security was one of the most important elements shaping the seas of the Middle Ages. On one side, lawless ones chasing freedom; on the other, states trying to provide order and security. This constant cat-and-mouse game constitutes one of the most exciting chapters of maritime history. While the seas of the Middle Ages were teeming with pirates, life on land also got its share of this threat. Pirate raids targeting sea trade, coastal towns, and even monasteries deeply affected the architecture of the coastline. Castle bastions rose, watchtowers were built, and harbors were surrounded by a tighter defense network. In other words, pirates became one of the shapers of not only the seas but also the architecture on land. Let's take a closer look at how medieval architecture was influenced by pirates, and at castles and defensive structures. Pirates were not just a distant threat for medieval coastal settlements. On the contrary, they were an extremely concrete and destructive reality. Sudden raids, plundering, enslavement, and disruption of trade could make life on the coast unbearable. This situation forced settlers and rulers to seek new ways to defend themselves against this threat. The main reasons for the reflection of pirate influence on architecture were: need for survival. Coastal towns and monasteries had to protect themselves from the sudden attacks of pirates. This was directly a matter of survival. Protection of trade. For port cities, trade was of vital importance. Since pirates could paralyze trade, protecting ports and storage areas was a must. Safety of the people. Ensuring the life and property safety of the people was one of the most basic duties of local rulers. Where there was no security, people migrated, and the economy collapsed. Castles and fortresses, the backbone of coastal defense. The most obvious structures developed against the pirate threat in medieval architecture were castles and fortresses. They were especially built at strategic points, harbor entrances, or important passages along the coastline. Watchtowers. High and sturdy watchtowers were used to detect ships appearing on the horizon from very far away. In case a pirate ship was detected, warnings were quickly given to surrounding settlements via signals or smoke. These towers could form an interconnected network along the coastline. Thick walls and bastions. Coastal castles were usually equipped with thick stone walls and high bastions, further strengthened on the sides facing the sea. These walls were designed to withstand a sudden landing or siege. Cannon emplacements. Late Middle Ages. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, with the development of gunpowder and cannon technology, cannons began to be placed in coastal fortresses. These could sink or damage pirate ships before they could approach the harbor. Artillery positions were strategically located against ships' blind spots. Harbor towers and chains. Special towers were built at the entrances of large harbors to control ship traffic and prevent pirate attacks. At night, or in times of danger, the harbor entrance could be closed with massive iron chains stretched between these towers. The chain drawn across the Golden Horn in Istanbul is the most well-known and effective example of this. Sea-facing gates and secret tunnels. Some coastal castles could have secret gates or tunnels opening directly to the sea. These could be used both for supplying provisions and as an escape route if under siege. Reshaping of coastal settlements. The pirate threat affected not only the construction of castles but also the general layout of coastal settlements. Retreat inland. Some small coastal towns or monasteries, under constant pirate threat, had to move further inland to more easily defensible regions. Fortified churches and monasteries. Even churches and monasteries on the coastline were often built like mini fortresses with thick walls and high windows to protect against attacks. Viking raids in particular forced Europe's coastal monasteries to take such defensive measures, as monasteries were both wealthy and vulnerable targets. Cooking on a pirate ship wasn't a luxurious endeavor like today. These were foods prepared under the most difficult conditions, usually with the simplest ingredients. The ship's galley, if it existed, was a narrow, airless place infested with rats. Even lighting a fire was a major risk because the wooden ship could catch fire at any moment. Basic factors affecting pirates' food choices and nutrition. Durability. Food had to be durable enough for long sea voyages. There were no refrigerators, not even derivatives of them. Portability. Since the ship had limited storage space, it was important for food not to take up much room. Access. How often they visited ports and whether they could find fresh supplies directly affected their menus. Cost. Since loot was mostly converted into weapons or cash, the amount spent on food was also limited. The standard pirate menu: hardtack and salted meat. A pirate's basic food on board was as follows. Hardtack, pexamet, also called ship's biscuit. Hardtack was the basic carbohydrate source. It was hard, dry, and durable. If stored correctly, it wouldn't spoil for months. But it was also tasteless, resembled stone, and was often infested with weevils. Pirates would soak it in water or alcohol to soften it, even having to ignore the maggots on it as a source of protein. Salted meat, beef or pork, was heavily salted to prevent spoilage. This meat could last for weeks, even months. Before consumption, it was soaked in water for a long time to remove the excess salt. Still, its taste was mostly tough, rubbery, and very salty. Dried fish. Caught fish were salted or dried for storage. This was one of the fresh protein sources, but it wasn't always available. Dried legumes and grains. Legumes like dried beans, peas, lentils, and grains like oats were important due to their durability and nutritional value. They were usually consumed as watery meals, oatmeal, or pea soup. Cheese and olives. Rarely, if they were lucky and had recently left a port, they might also have more durable cheese types or products like olives. Drinks, water and rum. Mostly water. Fresh water on ships was one of the most valuable resources. It was usually stored in large barrels, but this water would quickly grow algae, become moldy, and its taste would deteriorate. Running out of drinkable water was a cause for mutiny. Rum or beer. When water quality deteriorated or fresh water ran out, pirates usually turned to alcoholic beverages. Rum, beer, or wine were seen as a way to quench thirst and, under the false belief, prevent diseases. It also boosted morale. Rum became synonymous with pirate culture. It was cheap, durable, and easy to drink. The art of cooking on the open seas, huh? Food preparation on pirate ships was quite simple. In large cauldrons, all available ingredients were usually combined to make watery meals or soups called loblolly or burgoo. These meals were prepared by mixing whatever was left and were both energizing and warming. Fresh food was a luxury. When a ship was captured, fresh supplies, if any, were among the first things to be plundered. And when they anchored in a port with solid ground, pirates' first job was to try to find fresh fruit, vegetables, and meat. Diseases like scurvy arose from a lack of fresh food and were a more deadly threat than the sword for many pirates. In short, the food culture of medieval pirates was focused more on functionality and survival than taste. Salty, dry, and monotonous foods formed their daily menu, while the main goal was to provide the energy and strength to endure the next battle or storm. This was a relentless struggle given against hunger and diseases. Even the bravest warriors of the sea could be dependent on a slice of moldy hardtack. The turbulent waters of the sea, stories kneaded with storms, and the adventures of outlaws are full. Since the Middle Ages, pirates have not only remained on the pages of history, they have also become an inseparable part of folklore passed down from generation to generation, legends, and today's popular culture. With their ominous flags, eye patches, and buried treasures, pirates have become fixtures of our modern mythology. So how do these sea bandits still trigger our imagination so much despite all the time that has passed? Pirates and folklore and legends. In the Middle Ages and beyond, pirates found their place in folk tales and local folklore in different ways. They were sometimes feared, sometimes secretly admired figures. Rebellious and free spirit, pirates were rebellious figures who defied the authority of kings and states, setting their own rules. These characteristics created a kind of secret sympathy among oppressed peoples. They were those who dared to step outside the system. Bandit but good-hearted legends, just like Robin Hood, legends arose about some pirates taking from the rich and giving to the poor. These stories lifted pirates from being complete bandits and gave them a degree of legitimacy in the eyes of the people. Of course, such examples were rare, and most pirates were ruthless men only thinking of their own interests. Sea monsters and supernatural powers, fantastic stories also emerged around pirates, like fighting sea monsters, having cursed ships, or collaborating with supernatural powers. This further strengthened their already mysterious image. Pirate icons in popular culture. Today, pirates have become an indispensable part of global popular culture, especially through films, books, video games, and theme parks. Literary classics. Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island is perhaps the work that most influenced pirate legends. Long John Silver with his peg leg, his parrot, and the treasure map marked with an X laid the foundation for the modern pirate image. Characters like Captain Nemo in Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea represented the rebellious spirit of the seas in a different dimension. Cinema and television. Hollywood has brought pirates to the silver screen countless times. The Pirates of the Caribbean series, with the character of Captain Jack Sparrow, made piracy a popular phenomenon again. These films emphasize the romantic side of piracy by combining adventure, humor, and fantasy elements. The noble pirate figures played by actors like Errol Flynn in old films should not be forgotten. Video games like Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag offered players the experience of living as a pirate, participating in ship battles, and searching for buried treasure. These games allowed a more detailed look at piracy history. Theme parks and costumes, theme park attractions, especially Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland, brought the pirate theme to millions. Pirate costumes remain one of the most popular choices for celebrations like Halloween. Modern reflections, from symbols to behaviors. The legacy of pirates appears not only in the entertainment industry but also in more abstract reflections. Symbol of freedom, the Jolly Roger, the skull and crossbones pirate flag, still carries meanings like rebellion, freedom, risk-taking, and defiance of the established order today. It is frequently seen among motorcycle clubs, rock groups, or anarchist symbols. Pirate slang and terminology, words attributed to pirates like ahoy arr, crew, continue to be used in daily language or for humorous purposes. Copyright piracy. Today, the term piracy is also used to describe copyright infringements or illegal copying. This is a modern reflection of pirates' lawless image. Pirate parties and themes, pirate-themed events, from children's parties to adult entertainment, are still very popular. The pirates who have come from the dusty seas of the Middle Ages to the present day have become symbols of humanity's quest for adventure, freedom, and a rebellious spirit, beyond being historical figures. Their stories, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes romanticized, will continue to feed our imagination, give us the courage to set sail into the unknown, and listen to the calling voice of the seas. In the final analysis, the life of a pirate in the Middle Ages was a double-edged sword, sharpened by the winds of the open sea. On one side, there was the promise of freedom, adventure, and sudden wealth. On the other, the harsh reality of violence, disease, hunger, and a brutal death awaiting them on land. For some, it was a conscious choice. For others, the last resort of desperation. Let's summarize the factors that pushed a person in the Middle Ages to become a pirate. Freedom and escape. Breaking away from the rigid feudal order, escaping oppression or poverty. Adventure seeking. The desire to live life to the fullest, to set sail into the unknown, instead of being a boring peasant or a low-paid sailor. Rank and status. A peasant oppressed and unknown on land could transform into a daring warrior or even a leader on a pirate ship. Loot, greed, and promise of wealth. The allure of glittering gold. Capturing a merchant ship could mean instantly obtaining a fortune that couldn't be earned by working for months. This was a risky but attractive gamble. Luxurious life. The opportunity to live a lavish life in ports with the loot obtained, drinking expensive drinks, gambling, and having fun was irresistible for many poor people. Social exclusion and criminal identity. No way back. After becoming a pirate, returning to the legal society on land was often impossible. Pirates were seen as criminals sentenced to death. This situation radicalized them even more. Our family is here. The feeling of exclusion created a strong bond of unity and loyalty among pirates. The crew on the ship was their new family. They had to trust each other because the outside world was their enemy. Risk perception. Although the threat of death was constantly present, one got used to it over time, and risk perception changed. The awareness that life could end at any moment pushed them to live the moment more intensely and be bolder. Violence and use of force as a means of expression. For some individuals, piracy could be a way to express their inner potential for violence, or the allure of power. Because piracy was a profession that required direct conflict, threat, and physical superiority. In short, the reasons for a person to become a pirate were much deeper and more complex than a simple quest for adventure. These motivations, ranging from desperation to the quest for freedom, from greed for wealth to social exclusion, turned the seas of the Middle Ages and beyond into a kingdom of outlaws. They were a product of the ruthless conditions of their era, and these conditions had forced them to chart their own unique and dangerous paths. After the ruthless and monotonous life of the open sea, setting foot on land was like reaching heaven for a pirate. Ports were opportunities not only to repair ships and get supplies but also to release months of accumulated stress and energy, squander loot, and of course, have fun. However, this social life was not as innocent as it seemed. Behind the fun-filled moments lay dangerous relationships, fights, and the constant feeling of a knife at the back. Let's dive into the colorful but equally risky world of pirates in ports. When a pirate ship anchored in a port, the crew's first job was usually to convert their obtained loot into cash and then squander this money. Months of deprivation and danger pushed them towards a quest for instant gratification when they reached ports. Gambling and alcohol. There were taverns and gambling dens in every port, frequented by pirates. Gold won could change hands at a roulette table or dice games overnight. Alcohol flowed like water. Rum, beer, or wine were the easiest ways to forget the stress of the sea and the tension of approaching danger. These entertainments usually lasted until morning, with noisy laughter and occasionally bloody fights. Women. After long sea voyages, pirates wanted to spend time with women in ports. Brothels were their popular stops. However, these relationships were often temporary and superficial. Establishing permanent bonds was almost impossible for a constantly traveling and outlaw pirate. Shopping and luxury consumption. Some pirates would buy showy clothes, weapons, or jewelry with their money. This was an expression of their short-lived wealth. Additionally, some luxury food and drink that might be needed for the return to the ship were purchased. These entertainments in ports lifted the pirates' spirits and motivated them for the next voyage. However, spending money like water also often created the need to chase loot again. Dangerous relationships, enemies, and traitors were everywhere. Ports were not just places of entertainment for pirates. They were also places that harbored great risks. Danger lurked at every corner, and this made relationships quite complex. Government agents and pirate hunters. In ports, there were always government agents or private pirate hunters looking for an opportunity to capture pirates. Pirates who drank excessively and relaxed or spent money conspicuously became easy targets. Even a tavern brawl could sometimes be a trap or a pretext for capture. Informants and traitors. Informants who sold the location and plans of pirates to authorities could leak any information for money. Sometimes betrayals occurred even from within the crew. There were cases where a pirate was reported by his own friend. Black marketeers and frauds. Black marketeers who bought the goods pirates captured or those who forged fake documents for them were also dangerous business partners. These people often took advantage of the pirates' naivety or cheated them. Relationships were based on mutual distrust. Other pirate groups. The presence of different pirate groups in the same port usually caused tension. Fights, even bloody conflicts, could occur between rival groups. Everyone wanted their share in the hunting ground of the ports. Disease danger. Ports were gateways not only for people but also for diseases. Pirates struggling with diseases at sea also faced the risk of contracting plague, sexually transmitted diseases, and other epidemics in ports. The social life of pirates in ports was like a short-lived paradise. They chased momentary pleasures, tasted a rule-free freedom before returning to dangerous waters. However, the price of this freedom was also heavy. Because at any moment, their end could be brought by a guard appearing from a corner, an old enemy, or a traitor. Ports were both salvation and a potential grave for them. Just like the pirate life itself. The destructive power of piracy. The most obvious and often accepted aspect of piracy was its destructive power. Pirates operating on sea routes, the lifeblood of trade, caused large-scale economic damage. Economic collapse. The plundering of merchant ships laden with valuable goods drove merchants to bankruptcy, lowered tax revenues, and generally weakened regional economies. In areas frequently visited by pirates, trade volume decreased, and prices rose. Loss of life and terror. Pirate attacks not only caused material losses, but also cost the lives of innocent people. The killing or enslavement of the crew on board and raids on coastal towns created great fear and panic among the people. Challenging state authority. By applying their own laws and acting outside the control of kingdoms, pirates undermined the power of central authorities. This situation forced states to establish large and costly navies or compromise with pirates. Impeding development. The insecurity of trade and travel could slow down the discovery of maritime technologies or new trade routes. The sea, becoming a risky investment area, dulled the spirit of exploration. According to this perspective, pirates were merely bandits. They were elements that disrupted order, drove towards chaos, and impeded progress. The struggle against them was inevitable for the establishment of civilization and order. Liberators or alternative saviors? Rebellious spirits and doors of opportunity. Although their destructive aspects weighed heavily, when looking at the phenomenon of piracy from a different window, it is also possible to see some liberating or at least alternative aspects. A solution to desperation. For many poor, unemployed, or outlaw individuals, piracy was the only way to escape misery and oppression on land. The sea offered them a new life, a source of livelihood, and an opportunity to gain social status. For these people, becoming a pirate meant escaping from hunger or prison. It was a kind of their own salvation. Model of freedom and democracy. Pirate ships were often much more democratic than the feudal or autocratic governments on land. Decisions made by crew votes, the sense of justice in loot sharing, and even the leader being subject to questioning presented piracy as a kind of quest for freedom and equality. This was an escape point for those tired of the oppressive order on land. A tool for states. Surprisingly, pirates could sometimes be the saviors of states themselves. Through privateering letters, kings could disrupt their enemies' trade, finance wars, or gather intelligence without risking their own navies. This was like a low-cost army and gave states a strategic advantage. Figures like Heredin Barbarossa Bess represent this complex relationship, being both a pirate and an admiral of the Imperial Navy. Contribution to military development. The pirate threat forced states to build stronger navies, develop ship technologies, and build better defensive structures. This indirectly led to advances in seamanship and military architecture. Development of maritime law. The need to combat piracy contributed to the clearer determination of international maritime law, trade agreements, and maritime rules. Looking at medieval piracy through a single lens prevents us from fully understanding this complex phenomenon. They were destructive and ruthless sea bandits on one hand, but on the other hand, they were a product of the social and economic conditions of their era, even sometimes a symbol of resistance against these conditions. Their existence whispers a multi-layered story combining the lawlessness of the seas, the interests of states, and the individual struggle for survival. Pirates were neither completely good nor completely evil. They were some of the most colorful and controversial figures in history, representing every shade of gray in the seas of their own era. We've come to the end of another story. See you tomorrow. Good night.